In 2017, a father and his 12-year-old son went mountain biking in the Sierra Nevada near Lake Tahoe. They were experienced, careful, and they were supposed to be back by dinner, but they never came home. For 5 years, the trails were silent. Search teams scoured every ridge, every canyon. Nothing. No bikes. No gear. No trace. Then a lone hiker looked up at a 160-foot cliff, and what he saw changed everything. This wasn't an accident. This was the beginning of something far darker. The sun was merciless that afternoon. High above the Nevada desert, the sky was a piercing, unbroken blue, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer in waves. Ronan Vesper adjusted his pack, sweat tracing thin lines down his dust-caked neck. He had been hiking alone for 3 days. No cell signal, no human voices, only the wind hissing through the canyons and the rhythmic crunch of his boots against sun-baked earth. He liked it that way. Solitude was a balm. Out here there was no noise, no deadlines, no demands, just the endless stillness of the wilderness. But then he saw it. At first, it was nothing, just a glint of sunlight reflecting off something high on the cliff wall. He almost ignored it, assuming it was a shard of mica or some other desert mineral catching the light. But something about the angle, the unnatural way it gleamed against the dull rock, made him stop. He raised his binoculars and froze. 2 mountain bikes jammed into a fissure halfway down a 160-foot cliff. The sight was so absurd his brain rejected it at first. The bikes weren't mangled at the bottom of the canyon where you'd expect debris to land. They weren't tangled in a bush or resting in the dirt. They were hanging there vertically, like grotesque ornaments stuck in the rock. One was red and white, coated in years of dust but unmistakably high-end. The other, above it, was cyan. A sharp, faded blue that looked like it had been sun-bleached by half a decade of desert summers. Vesper's stomach tightened. He was no stranger to strange things in the backcountry. Abandoned gear, old campfires, the occasional wreckage of forgotten accidents. But this was different. He adjusted the focus of his binoculars, his breath catching in his throat. The lower bike's rear suspension spring, a distinctive white coil, stood out clearly. Someone had spent real money on that machine. You didn't just leave bikes like these. And then, the unease deepened. There was something else. Tattered fabric caught on a jagged outcropping just beneath the bikes. It looked like part of a jersey sleeve, shredded by wind and time, fluttering like a ghost's hand. Ronan felt a chill crawl up his spine despite the desert heat. People didn't just lose bikes this way. They didn't just vanish into the cliffs. And yet, he had heard the story. Everyone who spent enough time in the Sierra Nevada backcountry had. 5 years ago, a father and his son, experts on the trails, gone without a trace. And now, staring up at that impossible sight, Ronan realized he might have just stumbled into the answer to a mystery that had haunted Tahoe for half a decade. With trembling hands, he reached for his satellite phone. The morning had been perfect. The Sierra Nevada stretched endlessly beneath a sky of pale gold, the early sun spilling over granite peaks and tall pines. The air was crisp, the kind of mountain air that felt sharp in your lungs but left you awake, alive. Garrett Kinsley, 37, stood in the trailhead parking lot beside his truck, tightening the straps on his son Bryson's helmet. "Happy birthday, champ," he said, his voice low but warm. Bryson grinned, his braces flashing. "Best birthday ever, Dad." This was their tradition. No parties, no crowded bowling alleys or arcades. Just the two of them, bikes strapped to the back of Garrett's truck, and the endless trails of Lake Tahoe waiting. To them, this wasn't just recreation. It was ritual. Garrett had been mountain biking for over a decade. He didn't just ride the trails, he built them. He had spent years working with professional crews carving switchbacks and sculpting jumps in some of the most challenging terrains in the state. If anyone understood how to navigate the Sierra Nevada's treacherous network of trails, it was Garrett Kinsley. And Bryson? At 12, he was already better than most adults. Confident, fearless, always chasing his father's tire tracks. That weekend was supposed to be special. A birthday trip to Tahoe, 2 days of back-to-back rides on some of the most advanced technical trails in the region. Garrett had booked a resort room, pool, hot tub, the works. They'd ride all day, crash at the hotel, and maybe grab pizza before heading back out at dawn. Olivia Kinsley, Garrett's wife and Bryson's mother, had stayed behind in Sacramento. Hospitals didn't stop for birthdays, and she had a 12-hour nursing shift. But she trusted Garrett implicitly. He was careful, precise. He planned every detail. And that morning, everything had gone according to plan. At 8:17 a.m., Garrett texted Olivia. Made it to the resort. Bike's ready. He's grinning like an idiot. Love you. We'll call tonight. She smiled at her phone, tucked it into her scrub pocket, and went back to work. But that call never came. That evening, Olivia pulled into the driveway, exhausted but comforted by a single thought. Garrett and Bryson would be calling any minute. But the house stayed quiet. No call. No text. She told herself it was nothing. The trails around Tahoe were notorious for bad reception. They were probably grabbing dinner, maybe soaking in the hot tub, phones forgotten in their room. By 10 p.m., that excuse felt thinner. By midnight, it was gone. When her alarm went off the next morning, the silence in the house felt like a living thing. Heavy, suffocating, wrong. By lunch break, she was calling the resort. The front desk clerk was polite at first. Yes, Garrett Kinsley had checked in the day before. Yes, they had been given their room keys. But then came the pause. Ma'am, their keys haven't been used since check-in. Housekeeping says the beds are untouched. Their bags are still in the room. Olivia's heart stopped. Garrett and Bryson had checked in. They had gone out to ride. And they had never come back. By 3 p.m. on July 16th, Olivia was on the phone with the Placer County Sheriff's Office. Within hours, a full-scale search and rescue operation was underway. Helicopters circled above the jagged ridges. Ground teams fanned out along the network of trails. Dogs sniffed for scent trails that dissolved almost immediately in the thin mountain air. Garrett's truck was found at the Granite Loop trailhead, locked, undisturbed. 2 empty bike racks on the back. And then nothing. No tracks. No gear. No sign of a crash. It was as if the mountain had swallowed them whole. The sun had barely risen over Lake Tahoe when the first search and rescue helicopters took to the sky. The whine of rotor blades echoed off the granite cliffs as ground teams fanned out from the Granite Loop trailhead. Veteran Search Coordinator Lieutenant Mark Davenport stood in front of a large topographic map pinned against the hood of a sheriff's SUV, drawing lines with a red marker. "This is the entry point," he said, pointing to the trailhead where Garrett's truck was found. "From here, we have over 200 miles of interconnected trails. Dense forest, ridgelines, canyons. We need to think like Garrett Kinsley." The assembled SAR volunteers nodded grimly. They all knew of Garrett's reputation. He wasn't just a weekend rider, he was a builder, a man who had spent years carving some of these very trails into the unforgiving terrain. "This isn't your average lost hiker," Davenport continued. "If something happened, it wasn't on the easy routes. Start with the black diamonds. High exposure, technical descents. If there was an accident, that's where we'll find him." Dozens of boots hit the dirt as the search began. Back in Sacramento, Olivia Kinsley was running on fumes. By the time she arrived in Tahoe, 48 hours had passed since Garrett and Bryson were last seen. The command post was chaos. Radios crackling, maps spread across folding tables, exhausted deputies gulping down bad coffee. When Olivia walked in, everything stopped for a beat. She was clutching a photo in her hand. Garrett, smiling in his blue helmet, one arm around Bryson, whose orange goggles seemed almost comically oversized. "I just need them found," she whispered, voice trembling. Lieutenant Davenport placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Mrs. Kinsley, we're going to do everything we can." But even in his eyes, calm, professional, there was a shadow of doubt. SAR teams used a mix of aerial and ground methods. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging swept the ridges for heat signatures. Mounted trail experts rode bikes across the technical lines Garrett favored. K9 units combed the lower valleys, noses to the wind. Rope teams rappelled into the jagged ravines below Skyline Descent, the trail where two hikers had last seen Garrett and Bryson. Every movement was documented, every square foot logged. By sunset, they had found nothing. No tracks, no discarded energy bar wrappers, no tire marks in the dust. It was as if Garrett and Bryson had never entered the mountains at all. On day 2, a glimmer of hope. 2 hikers came forward. They had seen Garrett and Bryson on July 15th, around 2 p.m., near the junction for Skyline Descent, a trail notorious among locals for its danger. I remember thinking, one hiker said, that kid was fearless, just keeping pace with his dad like it was nothing. They hadn't looked distressed. They weren't lost. They were simply riding, and then gone. With the hiker's account, SAR Command zeroed in on Skyline Descent. This was not a trail for beginners. Steep exposure. One wrong move could send a rider tumbling hundreds of feet. Rock gardens. Sharp, jagged boulders littered the path. Remote location. Hours from the nearest trailhead. If an accident had happened here, it would have been catastrophic. Rope teams combed the sheer cliffs with binoculars, peering into ravines. Drones skimmed the treetops, scanning for scraps of gear. But again, nothing. Not a single broken branch. Not a single sign of struggle. By day 4, whispers began to spread through the command post. 1. The accident theory. The simplest explanation. Garrett and Bryson had crashed hard and fallen into a hidden crevasse or become trapped in an area even drones couldn't reach. But seasoned SAR veterans pushed back. If they went down, we'd see something, one rescuer argued. A helmet. A bike. Anything. 2. The animal theory. Some suggested a mountain lion attack. But the forensic reality didn't fit. Predators left signs. Blood. Clothing. Drag marks. Nothing. 3. The voluntary disappearance theory. This one hurt Olivia the most. Could Garrett have staged it? Taken Bryson and vanished deliberately? She shot the idea down immediately. Garrett lived for that boy. He wouldn't put him through that. He wouldn't put me through that. Lieutenant Davenport agreed. There's no evidence of a staged disappearance. And if it was planned, why leave the truck? By day 5, the search had shifted from hopeful rescue to grim recovery. The mountain became a living nightmare for Olivia. She stood at the trailhead, staring at the endless forest. The smell of pine was sharp in the air. I should have called sooner, she whispered. She replayed that night over and over. The missed call, the empty house, the moment she told herself not to worry. Guilt settled on her like lead. One deputy tried to comfort her. Even if you'd called earlier, ma'am, it wouldn't have changed this. But Olivia didn't believe him. Every mother's instinct told her she should have known. After 3 weeks, the search was scaled down. The helicopters left. The rope teams packed up. The maps were folded and boxed away. Lake Tahoe moved on. But Olivia didn't. Every night, she stared at Garrett and Bryson's bikes still mounted in the last family photo, still gleaming as if ready for another ride. And in the quiet hours, one thought consumed her. How does the earth just swallow 2 people whole? Ronan Vesper had spent years hiking through the forgotten corners of the American West, but nothing could have prepared him for this. 2 mountain bikes, jammed into a fissure on a 160-foot cliff. The red and white frame caught the sun like a mirror, the white suspension coil almost glowing against the rock. Above it, a cyan bike, bleached and lifeless, sat wedged in place like it had been hurled by an angry god. And just below them, that strip of fabric, frayed, faded, clinging to a sharp outcropping. Ronan lowered his binoculars, his hands trembling. He didn't know whose bikes they were. He didn't need to. He'd heard the story whispered in trail lodges and campgrounds. The Kinsley case. They say father and son just vanished. Never found a thing. Ronan backed away, fumbled with his satellite phone, and hit the emergency channel. This is Ronan Vesper. I found something. You're going to want to see this. When the Placer County Sheriff's Office received the transmission, Lieutenant Mark Davenport thought it was a hoax. 2 bikes? On a cliff? after 5 years. But Ronan's GPS coordinates told a different story. This wasn't anywhere near the original search grid. The location was 26 miles southeast of Granite Loop, barren canyon country. No trails, no roads, no reason for anyone, let alone a father and son on mountain bikes, to be there. Davenport dispatched a team. By dawn the next day, SAR helicopters circled over the canyon. The bikes were exactly where Ronan said they'd be. 2 silent, dust-coated relics suspended on a vertical wall of stone. Detective Elena Morales, assigned to the cold case unit for years, stared through the chopper's window. "Jesus," she muttered. "They're really up there." Rope teams rappelled down from the cliff rim. As they neared the fissure, the details became unmistakable. The red and white frame, the cyan frame above it, the fabric scrap, now confirmed to be part of a torn jersey sleeve. Everything was frozen in time like a macabre exhibit. It took nearly 8 hours for the rope teams to extract the bikes. They were wedged deep, almost impossibly so, as if nature itself hadn't wanted to let them go. When they finally pulled the red and white bike free, the white rear suspension coil was exactly as Olivia had described 5 years earlier. Then came the cyan bike. Both were tagged, catalogued, and airlifted out. The torn jersey sleeve was carefully placed in a separate evidence bag. Morales radioed back to the command post. "Call Mrs. Kinsley. We've got something." When the phone rang, Olivia almost didn't answer. 5 years of false leads had taught her not to hope. But when she heard the words, "Mrs. Kinsley, we've recovered your husband and son's bikes," her knees nearly buckled. Are they?" Morales hesitated. "No remains yet, just the bikes. But it's a start." For the first time in half a decade, Olivia felt something stir in her chest. Not closure, not relief, just movement. The case was alive again. The bikes were transported to the sheriff's evidence lab. Technicians worked in silence, photographing every scratch, every dent. What they found was strange. Minimal damage. Despite being wedged in a cliff for 5 years, neither bike showed catastrophic crash damage. No snapped frames, no bent forks, no obvious sign of a high-speed impact. Deliberate placement, the alignment of the bikes, stacked almost neatly, baffled investigators. "If they fell," Morales noted, "how do they land like this?" Fabric sample. The torn jersey sleeve matched the size of a child. DNA tests would confirm it belonged to Bryson. And then, one more chilling detail. Inside the frame of Garrett's bike, tucked into the hollow of the seat tube, was a scrap of paper. Water-damaged, nearly illegible. But one line was still clear. Not an accident. Within 24 hours, the Kinsley case was back on every news station in California. 5 years later, break in Tahoe mystery. Bikes found in cliff face raise questions. Cryptic note reignites theories in Kinsley disappearance. Olivia's quiet, grief-numbed world was thrown into chaos. Reporters camped outside her home. Internet forums exploded with speculation. Some insisted it proved foul play. Others claimed it was a staged disappearance gone wrong. But for Olivia, none of it mattered. All she cared about was the same question that had haunted her for half a decade. Where are my husband and my son? Detective Morales led a new task force. Their first step, retrace Garrett and Bryson's path. They returned to Granite Loop, walked every trail, interviewed every witness again. But the desert canyon was the key. How had 2 expert riders traveled 26 miles, across some of the most dangerous, impassable terrain, only to end up suspended in a cliff? Morales stared at the map in the command center. There was only one conclusion. Someone put them there. The first time Olivia saw the bikes was worse than she imagined. They were lifeless, covered in a gray film of desert dust. Bryson's white suspension coil, once pristine, was pitted with age. She reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the handlebars. "I used to watch him ride this in the backyard," she whispered. Morales stood beside her. "We're going to find out what happened, Mrs. Kinsley. I promise you that." But Olivia had learned long ago that promises meant nothing against a mountain that swallowed people whole. Detective Elena Morales sat at the head of the operations table, the room dim except for the glow of monitors and the massive topographic map spread across the wall. Pinned to it were photographs of the two recovered bikes. 5 years, she said, her voice steady but sharp. And these are the first real pieces of evidence we've had. We're not treating this like an accident anymore. We follow the evidence wherever it leads. Around the table, deputies and forensic analysts leaned in. They were no longer searching for hikers lost in the wilderness. They were investigating what now looked disturbingly like a crime. The first theory was the simplest and the most troubling. Garrett and Bryson rode out of Granite Loop, somehow crossed nearly 26 miles of unmarked terrain, and ended up in that canyon. Impossible? Not for Garrett. He was an elite rider. He'd ridden sections most people wouldn't even attempt. But even if he could have done it, why take his 12-year-old son? Morales studied the map, tracing the distance with her finger. Even Garrett wouldn't risk this with a child, she muttered, unless it wasn't voluntary. Some investigators began to suggest something darker. Garrett and Bryson might have been intercepted on the trail, forced away from the main path, led or dragged into the backcountry where no one could follow. The problem? There were no tracks, no discarded gear, no evidence of a struggle. It was as if father and son had been plucked from the trail and dropped into the wilderness. The bike's positioning on the cliff face, too precise, too improbable, sparked another unsettling idea. Someone staged this. Morales couldn't shake the image of those bikes stacked in that fissure like props. Whoever put them there wanted them found, she said in a late-night briefing. But not too soon. Just long enough for the case to freeze solid. A deliberate message. But to whom? For Olivia, the theories didn't matter. Every day, she drove to the sheriff's office, sitting quietly in the corner of the task force room, listening. Sometimes she didn't speak for hours, but Morales didn't make her leave. She's our anchor, Morales admitted to one deputy. She keeps this real. This isn't just a case file. Those are her people out there. Late one night, Olivia whispered something that stayed with Morales. If someone took them, detective, they didn't just take my family. They left me buried with them. In late August 2022, a new ground operation began. SAR teams, forensic anthropologists, and cadaver dogs were flown into the desert canyon where the bikes were found. The heat was brutal, triple digits during the day, freezing at night. For days, they combed the cliffs. On the third morning, one of the dogs began to bark. The handler called out, "Over here. I've got something." It was a small cavity in the cliff wall, barely wide enough for a grown man to crawl into. At first glance, it looked empty. Just dust, rock, and silence. But then, a glint of fabric and bone. Forensics teams moved quickly. They retrieved what they could, partial remains, badly weathered, sun-bleached from years of exposure. Next to them, a child-sized helmet, the kind with bright red paint, scuffed at the edges. Morales stared at it for a long time before saying a word. Tag it, bag it. They would later confirm through DNA. It was Bryson. When Morales called Olivia, there was no sound at first. "Mrs. Kinsley," Morales said softly. We found him. We found Bryson." Olivia didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just whispered, "Where's his father?" If they had found Bryson in the cliff, Garrett had to be nearby. But for 5 more days, the team scoured the area and came up empty. No second set of remains. No trace of Garrett. Just one haunting footprint, a partial boot print, preserved in the dry earth, larger than Bryson's. Faced away from the bikes. And then it simply stopped. Now the theories shifted. Had Garrett tried to save his son, only to vanish himself? Or had someone else been there that day? A third presence no one had ever considered? Morales stared at the footprint photo late one night, exhaustion weighing down her shoulders. "This isn't the mountain anymore," she said. "This is someone's design." The desert had been silent for days. Searchers moved like ghosts across the jagged terrain, their boots scraping against rock, their radios crackling softly in the dry, oppressive heat. Bryson's remains had been retrieved. His small helmet, red and scuffed, now sat in an evidence bag back at the sheriff's office, a haunting reminder of the boy who vanished on his birthday trip. But Garrett was still missing. Detective Morales refused to leave the canyon until she had an answer. On the 6th day of the renewed search, it came. It was a geologist on loan to the search team who found it. A narrow slit in the cliffside, hidden behind a curtain of rock and dry brush. Could be nothing, he called out. But Morales went in anyway. The air inside was cold, a shocking contrast to the sun-baked desert. She switched on her flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on something that made her stomach twist. A boot, wedged between two rocks. The leather was cracked, the laces frayed with age, but it was unmistakable. An adult-sized hiking boot, the same brand Garrett Kinsley was known to wear. And beside it, half buried in dust, a torn backpack with a faded patch. Bryson's initials. Forensics swarmed the cave. Inside the backpack, a crushed energy bar wrapper, a half-empty water bottle, the plastic warped with age, and a folded piece of paper tucked into a zippered compartment. It was brittle, almost disintegrating, but the writing, shaky and uneven, was still legible. If anyone finds this, I didn't fall. We were not alone. The room fell silent. Morales stared at the words, her mind racing. Who was we? And what did Garrett mean by not alone? When Olivia was shown the note, she collapsed into a chair. Not alone, she whispered. Does that mean someone else was there? Or he was losing his mind out there? Morales crouched in front of her. We don't know yet, but if Garrett left this, it means he survived, at least for a while. Olivia's hands trembled. For the first time, there was a sliver of hope. But there was also fear. Back at the lab, Garrett's boot was examined. Inside, there was sand and tiny fragments of rock matching the canyon floor. No blood, no sign of a violent struggle. The note, however, told a different story. Handwriting experts confirmed it was Garrett's, and the shaky letters suggested he was either injured or terrified. The task force began to assemble a chilling new scenario. Garrett and Bryson had somehow ended up in the desert canyon. They survived for at least some time, long enough for Garrett to write the note. But they weren't alone. Whoever or whatever was with them, Morales said in a late-night briefing, made sure they never came back. Investigators began combing through old witness statements. One hiker's report, long dismissed, resurfaced. He had been on Granite Loop the afternoon of July 15, 2017. He'd seen Garrett and Bryson, but he also remembered someone else, a lone rider, following them at a distance. He hadn't thought much of it then. Trails were busy. Riders came and went. But now that detail gnawed at Morales like a splinter. On the 9th day of the renewed search, deep within the canyon, they found it, a weathered campsite, half collapsed, scattered debris, rusted cans, scraps of fabric, and the charred remnants of a fire pit buried in sand. But among the debris was something that didn't belong to Garrett or Bryson. A second boot, smaller, different brand, and next to it, a hunting knife pitted with rust but still intact. Implications. If Garrett and Bryson weren't alone, then who had been there with them? Theories exploded. A stranger in the wilderness. Someone encountered them in the backcountry and led them into the canyon. An unseen stalker. A rider who followed them from Granite Loop. The Canyon Hermit. A local legend about a recluse living deep in the wilderness suddenly didn't sound so absurd. Morales, however, didn't speculate publicly. We don't deal in campfire stories, she told reporters. We deal in evidence. And this evidence tells me we are no longer looking at a simple disappearance. When Olivia saw the second boot, she couldn't breathe. Who was out there with them? She asked Morales, her voice raw. Morales didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence was enough. The sun was barely up when Detective Elena Morales and her team returned to the canyon. The campfire site, Garrett's note, and the second boot had changed everything. This wasn't an accident anymore, this was deliberate. The air was heavy, the silence absolute. Morales looked up at the jagged cliffs surrounding them and muttered, "If these walls could talk." But they didn't. They only seemed to watch. Forensic analysts began piecing together the evidence like fragments of a nightmare. The note, written in Garrett's hand, shaky and desperate. The boot and knife, belonging to an unknown individual. The campsite, indicating survival and company. Their working theory, Garrett and Bryson weren't just lost. They were trapped, and whoever had been with them didn't want them found. During a detailed sweep of the campsite, investigators recovered a tattered notebook buried under a pile of rock debris. The cover was faded, but inside accrued sketches. Hand-drawn maps of the surrounding canyon. Lines, symbols, and strange markings. One in particular chilled Morales. A circled X, scrawled repeatedly, almost obsessively, near the very spot where the bikes had been wedged into the cliff. And beside it, 3 words written over and over, "Watch from above." Guided by the notebook's crude map, the team discovered a narrow crevice in the cliff wall, partially concealed by collapsed rock. It was barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through. Inside, a pile of scavenged supplies, empty cans, broken tools, scraps of fabric that didn't match Garrett or Bryson's clothing. And something else, a length of climbing rope, frayed but still knotted, as if it had been used to lower heavy objects down the cliff. The implication hit Morales like a punch. Someone had access to this canyon for years, and had been using it. When the rope was tested, it came back with mixed DNA profiles. One belonged to Garrett Kinsley. The other was unidentified. Not Bryson. Not anyone in the database. A third, unknown person had been with them. When Olivia was told about the DNA, she didn't speak. Not at first. She stared at the floor of the sheriff's office, hands trembling, until finally, in a broken whisper, she asked, "Was he trying to save my son? Or was someone keeping them there?" Morales placed a hand on her shoulder but didn't answer, because she didn't know. Not yet. Over the next week, Morales became obsessed with one question. Why the cliff? Why wedge the bikes in a fissure where they'd remain hidden for years? But not forever. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A drone operator scanning the canyon rim found a narrow ledge, barely visible from the ground. And there, lodged in the rock, was a small bundle wrapped in a sun-bleached tarp. It was retrieved by rope team. Inside, a rusted multi-tool, a cracked GPS device with dead batteries, and a notebook water-stained but still intact. The handwriting matched Garrett's. Most of it was illegible, but a few lines could still be read. 3 nights. No stars. He's always there. Bryson is scared. I told him we'd be home soon. If anyone finds this, tell Olivia I tried. And at the bottom of the page, one final line scratched so hard it nearly tore the paper. It wasn't an accident. The team debated endlessly. Was Garrett describing a man? A stalker who followed them into the wilderness? Or was this the rambling of a desperate father, trapped and hallucinating from exhaustion? Even Morales couldn't shake the feeling they were staring into the mind of a man who had seen something no one could explain. And then came the final blow. A fragment of bone was discovered in the same crevice. DNA confirmed it was Garrett. But the placement didn't make sense. He hadn't fallen. He'd been placed there. That night, Morales stood at the edge of the canyon with Olivia beside her. The wind howled through the rocks like a warning. Why would someone do this? Olivia asked, her voice almost lost in the wind. Morales didn't answer, because she didn't believe this was over. Not even close. The canyon was no longer just a place of loss. It was a crime scene. The note in Garrett's handwriting, the unidentified DNA, and the deliberate placement of the bikes had forced Detective Elena Morales to reframe the case. This wasn't the mountain, she said to her team in the dimly lit task force room. This was someone else's doing. And if Garrett's words, "We were not alone," were to be believed, then the third presence wasn't a ghost story. It was flesh and blood. Investigators dug into the archives of missing person cases near the Sierra Nevada. The pattern was unsettling. 2014. A solo backpacker vanished 12 miles south of Granite Loop. 2015. A pair of hikers reported strange noises in the same general area but escaped unharmed. 2016. A trail runner described being followed for hours by a shadowy figure he never saw clearly. And then came 2017, Garrett and Bryson. Each incident drew a line on Morales's map, and every line pointed toward the same region, the canyon where the bikes were found. Old local rumors resurfaced. They spoke of a man, a hermit who supposedly lived deep in the wilderness, far from civilization. Hunters claimed to see faint smoke trails in the distance. Some dismissed it as folklore, but others swore it was true. One retired ranger, Bill Harmon, gave a statement. "I don't know his name, never saw him up close, but he's out there. I found snares, makeshift camps, and once, I swear, I heard him just breathing while I hiked past a rock outcropping. Didn't see him, but I knew." Morales couldn't ignore it. If a man had been living off the grid for years, he could have crossed paths with Garrett and Bryson. And maybe he hadn't let them leave. When Morales presented this theory, Olivia's hands clenched into fists. "You're saying some man, some stranger, took my husband and son, and just stayed out there?" "We don't know yet," Morales replied carefully. "But this is the first lead that fits the evidence." Olivia stared at the crime scene photos, the bikes, the cave, the note. Then find him. To navigate the canyon's brutal terrain, Morales brought in an expert, Ethan Rowe, a former military tracker who'd spent years following smugglers and fugitives through remote borderlands. Within hours of stepping into the canyon, Ethan spotted what others had missed: a faint series of fire pits, nearly invisible beneath wind-blown sand, makeshift shelters hidden in rock shadows, and the most disturbing find of all, a carved symbol etched into stone. It was crude, circular, and repeated in several locations near the cliffs where Garrett's remains were found. When Ethan was asked what it meant, he only frowned. "It's a marker," he said. "Someone wanted to claim this ground." Armed with Ethan's findings, the task force mapped out a network of hidden paths winding through the canyon. At least 3 more campsites were discovered. Each one was stripped bare, just ashes, stone circles, and crude tools. But in one of them, they found a single item that froze the entire team: a torn piece of fabric. It matched the sleeve of Garrett's biking jersey. There was no longer any doubt. Someone had been in that canyon, and Garrett had encountered them. But the question that gnawed at Morales was why. If this man, this watcher, as locals had started calling him, had killed Garrett and Bryson, why leave the bikes staged in the cliff? Why the note? Why the bizarre sense of ritual that hung over every piece of evidence? It didn't feel random. It felt planned. Against Morales's advice, Olivia insisted on visiting the site where her son's remains were found. The wind tore at her hair, and the canyon stretched endlessly before her like a wound in the earth. "I hate this place," she whispered. Morales stood beside her. "So do I." Olivia's eyes lingered on the fissure where the bikes had once been wedged. "He wanted me to know," she said quietly. "Garrett left that note because he wanted me to understand it wasn't his fault." Morales didn't reply, but in her heart, she agreed. This wasn't Garrett's doing. This was someone else's nightmare. As the task force prepared to expand their search, Ethan found something that made even the veteran tracker go pale. Footprints. Fresh ones. Not hikers. Not SAR teams. Barefoot. They led from a hidden alcove in the canyon and vanished into the rocks. The prints were unmistakable. Morales crouched over the dry canyon floor, her gloved fingers tracing the faint depressions. "Not boots?" Ethan Rowe muttered, his voice low, as if speaking louder might disturb something watching them. "Not shoes either. Bare feet. Wide set. Calloused. Whoever this is, they've been out here a long time." The prints weren't just random. They formed a path, leading deeper into a section of the canyon SAR had never searched before. A place the maps didn't even name. Locals called it one thing: the hollow. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. The wind died. Even the birds avoided this place. The walls of the canyon closed in until they were walking single file along a narrow path carved by centuries of erosion. At one point, Ethan stopped. He knelt down, inspecting a stone surface. A symbol was scratched into it, the same crude circle found at the earlier campsite. "Territorial marker," Ethan whispered. "We're in his ground now." Morales tightened her grip on her flashlight. For the first time in years of investigating, she felt something she never admitted to her team: fear. 2 hours later, they found it. A shelter wedged between two cliffs, invisible unless you were standing almost on top of it. The entrance was covered in branches and old canvas. When Morales pulled the cover aside, the smell hit first. Smoke, sweat, and something else. Old decay. Inside, crude wooden furniture, piles of scavenged gear, empty food cans, torn clothing, rusted tools. And on the far wall, dozens of marks scratched into the stone. Each one a vertical line. Hundreds of them. Morales stared, her skin crawling. "Days," Ethan said flatly. "He's been keeping count." And then, in the center of it all, something worse. Pinned with a sharpened stick was a photo. Garrett and Bryson. The same one Olivia had given investigators 5 years ago. The room went cold. "How did he get this?" one deputy whispered. Morales didn't answer. There was no sign of the man himself. No footprints leaving the shelter. Just silence. And the feeling they were being watched. Ethan turned in a slow circle, scanning the cliffs above. "He's here," he muttered. For the next 48 hours, they set up motion sensors and night vision cameras around the hollow. The first night was uneventful. The second night, the cameras picked up movement. A shape, tall, thin, barefoot. It lingered at the edge of the camp, watching from the rocks. And then it smiled. Not at the camera. At something or someone beyond it. And then it vanished. When Morales showed Olivia the video, her face went pale. "That's him," Olivia whispered. "Who?" "The one Garrett meant. We were not alone. He saw this man." Her hands trembled. "He must have been watching them, hunting them." Morales didn't disagree. By the third night, Morales deployed a specialized tactical unit to the hollow. Their mission, track him. But the Watcher didn't run. He led them. Footprints appeared and vanished. Strange echoes bounced through the cliffs, luring the team in circles. It was a game, and he was winning. Ethan spat into the dust. "He knows this ground better than anyone. He's been here for years. He's not running because he doesn't have to." On the fourth day, they found a second shelter, even deeper in the canyon. Inside, a makeshift bed of animal hides. A stack of bones, animal but cleaned with disturbing precision. And carved into the rock wall, 2 names. Kinsley, Bryson K. The letters were jagged, scratched deep, as though whoever carved them wanted them to last forever. Olivia wept when she saw the photos. He kept them here," she said. "He marked them, like trophies." Morales's jaw clenched. "We're not dealing with a ghost story. We're hunting a man." The hollow was silent. Detective Elena Morales stood at the canyon's edge, staring down at the jagged maze of rock and shadow. For days, the task force had tracked the barefoot prints. They were erratic, looping, sometimes vanishing altogether, only to reappear in impossible places. "This isn't random." "Ethan Rowe," the tracker muttered. "He's leading us. He wants us in there." Morales looked at him. "Why?" Ethan's answer was blunt. "Because it's his ground. He's not running, he's hunting." The tactical team rappelled into the hollow. The canyon walls rose like prison bars around them. The sky a narrow strip of pale blue. Every sound, every shift of gravel, every scrape of boots against stone, echoed back like whispers. Then came the first marker. A circle carved into the rock, this one larger than the others. Inside it, a crude symbol, an arrow pointing downward. Ethan's jaw tightened. "He wants us to go deeper." Morales nodded. "Then we go." They found it an hour later, a narrow pass choked with stones. One deputy moved to clear it until Ethan stopped him. "Don't," he said sharply. He knelt down, brushing the dust away with careful fingers. Underneath was a trigger line, almost invisible, rigged to a cluster of jagged rocks above. A deadfall trap, hand-built. "Jesus," Morales whispered. The Watcher hadn't just been surviving out here. He'd been defending his territory. Deeper into the canyon, they found another hideout. This one was different. Inside, hung against the rock walls, were dozens of objects. Torn pieces of clothing, rusted tools. And in the center, Garrett's watch. It was cracked, the band torn, but it was his. Olivia had given it to him for his birthday 2 years before he vanished. Morales picked it up with gloved hands, her chest tightening. "He kept it," she murmured. Ethan frowned. "Not kept, displayed. Like a warning." Back at the command post, a profiler from the FBI reviewed the evidence. "This isn't a man living in fear," she said. "This is dominance. He marks his kills. He builds traps. He stalks anyone who enters his territory. He doesn't just survive here, he rules here." Morales stared at the map of the hollow, the red marks showing every site they'd found. The profiler added one more thing. "If he's been watching you, he already knows you're coming." That night, cameras picked up movement again. The Watcher, this time closer. He stood at the rim of the canyon, just a silhouette against the pale starlight, watching the investigators below. Not running, not hiding, watching. And then, slowly he raised his hand and pointed straight toward the place where Garrett's bikes had once been wedged in the cliff. Then he vanished. When Morales showed Olivia the footage, her reaction was chilling. "He's mocking you," Olivia said flatly. "He wants you to see him. He wants this to be a game." Her voice cracked. "That's what Garrett was up against. That's what my son saw in his last days." Morales clenched her fists. The game was ending. Ethan led the team deeper than they had gone before. The path was brutal, the rock sharp and unforgiving. Then they found it. A narrow opening in the canyon wall, almost invisible in the shifting shadows. Inside, a staircase of carved stone led down into darkness. "This isn't natural," Ethan said, his voice low. "He made this." Morales stared into the blackness. "Gear up. We're going in." The air inside was cold, damp. Their flashlights cut through the black, beams bouncing off rough-hewn walls. After 50 feet, the tunnel widened into a cavern. And there, on the far wall, carved deep into the stone, were dozens of names. Some were old, weathered. Others were fresh. And at the very bottom, G. Kinsley, B. Kinsley, and one more, scratched beneath them in shaky, erratic lines. Mine. The truth was no longer buried. The canyon wasn't just the scene of an accident. It was a hunting ground, and the man who ruled it wasn't done. Because as Morales stood in that cavern, her radio crackled to life. A voice, low and ragged, whispered through the static. "You shouldn't be here." The static was sharp, almost metallic. Morales froze, her hand gripping the radio. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was faint, low, raspy. Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "That's him." The sound faded, swallowed by silence, leaving only the hollow echo of their own breathing inside the cavern. Morales looked around at her team. "Track the signal. Now." A technician scanned the frequency. The source was close, less than half a mile away. The Watcher wasn't just observing anymore. He was speaking. They moved fast, following the signal deeper into the hollow. The footprints were there again, barefoot, white, almost deliberate. Ethan muttered under his breath. "He wants us to follow him." The canyon twisted, its walls narrowing like a throat. And then, movement, a figure darting across the rocks ahead. Thin, lithe, barefoot. The Watcher. "Go!" Morales barked. They pursued him, their flashlights cutting through the dark like blades. For years, he had been a phantom, a rumor. But now, under the beam of Morales's flashlight, he turned, and for a split second, they saw his face. Sunken cheeks, matted hair, eyes like polished glass, pale and unblinking, and a smile thin, stretched too far, as if it hadn't been used in years. Then he vanished again, melting into the rocks like smoke. Ethan hissed. He knows every inch of this place. He's toying with us. The pursuit led them into another cavern, this one larger than the last. And there, they found it, a shrine. Bones, arranged in crude patterns. Animal skulls stacked in rows. And in the center, hanging from the rock wall, a collection of objects. Garrett's torn jacket, Bryson's broken goggles, and a strip of fabric, Olivia's handwriting on it. It was from a card she'd written years ago. Garrett must have carried it in his pack. Now it was pinned like a trophy. Morales's stomach turned. He kept them, she whispered. Ethan's face was stone. He's watching us right now. As they documented the scene, one deputy stepped too close to the cavern's far wall. There was a snap, a rope jerked, and a weighted log swung down, smashing into the ground inches from his head. The watcher had rigged the chamber. He wasn't just hiding here. He was defending it. Everyone out, Morales ordered. But as they backed out of the chamber, the radios crackled again. Leave or stay forever. When Morales relayed the discovery to Olivia, she broke down. All these years, she said, her voice raw, he was out there, watching them, playing with them. Her hands shook as she gripped the evidence photos. Bring him in, she whispered, or don't come back. Morales didn't promise her anything, but she didn't need to, because she wasn't leaving this canyon until it was over. Ethan led the team in laying motion sensors around the cavern entrances. Night fell. They waited, and just after 3 a.m., one of the sensors tripped. The cameras caught him. The watcher, crouched on a ledge above them, staring down. Not blinking, not moving, just watching. Spotlight, Morales ordered. A beam lit up the ledge, and there he was, for the first time fully visible. His skin was leathered from years in the sun. His hair was wild, tangled with dirt. His clothes were patchwork, stitched from scavenged fabric. But it was his eyes that froze the team. Cold, hollow, unhuman in their emptiness. Morales raised her voice. Who are you? The watcher tilted his head and smiled. Mine, he rasped, and then he vanished into the rocks. Detective Elena Morales stood at the head of the operations table. The canyon map spread before her like a battlefield. The watcher had eluded them for 5 years. But not anymore. We've tracked his patterns, she said, pointing to red markers. Every movement, every campsite, every symbol. He returns to one place repeatedly, the hollow's central cavern. Ethan Rowe, the tracker, leaned over the map. He thinks it's his territory. If we bait him, he'll come to defend it. Morales nodded. We're not chasing him this time. We make him come to us. They set it up at dusk. A false camp, deep inside the hollow. Motion-activated floodlights hidden in the rocks. High-frequency sound emitters, barely audible to humans but enough to disorient a stalker who lived in silence. Netting traps rigged to collapse. This isn't standard procedure, one deputy muttered. Morales glanced at him. Nothing about this case has been standard. At the center of the trap, they placed the bait. A bike. Not just any bike. Garrett Kinsley's. The one they'd recovered from the cliff. If he's obsessive enough to keep trophies, Morales said, this will draw him out. Night fell like a shroud. The canyon was pitch black, the stars barely visible between the jagged walls. Morales, Ethan, and the tactical team waited in absolute stillness, hidden among the rocks, their eyes fixed on the false camp. Minutes stretched into hours. Then, around 2:17 a.m., the sensors tripped. A figure emerged from the darkness, barefoot, thin, moving like a shadow. The watcher. He moved slowly, his head tilting unnaturally, as if listening for something no one else could hear. His pale eyes locked on the bike. And then he smiled. Ethan's whisper was sharp. He's taking the bait. The watcher stepped into the camp. One more step. 2. And then, the floodlights roared to life. The canyon exploded with blinding white. The watcher froze, and for the first time he looked afraid. The tactical team moved as one. Netting dropped from above, tangling around him. He thrashed, inhumanly fast, his strength shocking even the seasoned deputies. He screamed, raw, guttural, like an animal driven into a corner. But the net held. They dragged him down, pinning his wiry frame to the dirt. For the first time in 5 years, the Watcher was no longer a ghost. He was flesh, and he was caught. Up close, he was worse than Morales imagined. His skin was a map of scars, his nails jagged and blackened, his eyes empty, but sharp with feral intelligence. He didn't speak, not at first. When Morales knelt beside him, he turned his head and whispered one word, "Mine." After extracting him, the task force returned to the cavern. Behind a false wall of rock, they found a narrow passage, and at the end of it, a hidden chamber. Inside, Garrett's torn wallet, Bryson's jersey sleeve, several other personal items from missing persons cases predating the Kinsleys, and a ledger scratched into stone, each line a mark, hundreds of them. Morales realized with horror what it was. "Victims," she whispered. "He's been doing this for years." When Morales told Olivia, she wept silently. "He hunted them," she said, "like animals." Morales didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes, but now, he'll never hurt anyone again." Olivia stared at the evidence photos. Her hand rested on the image of Garrett's bike. "You caught him because of this," she whispered, "because Garrett left a trail. Even in death, he found a way to lead you here." Morales nodded. He did. The chamber was silent except for the rustle of pages. Detective Elena Morales stood over the evidence table, gloved hands trembling slightly as she flipped through the brittle, dirt-stained notebook they'd recovered from the Watcher's hidden lair. It wasn't his handwriting. It was Garrett Kinsley's. The title page was smeared and faded, but the first words were clear. "If someone finds this, tell Olivia I tried." The room went still. Morales drew a sharp breath. They weren't just holding a notebook. They were holding Garrett's last testament. The early pages were written with steady, precise script, Garrett's voice captured on paper. July 16th. The trail is gone. I don't understand. We should be near Granite Loop, but every turn takes us deeper. Bryson's trying to be brave. I can't let him see I'm scared. July 17th. No service. No sign of other riders. Found a cave for shelter. Bryson's tired, but will keep moving at first light. Morales could almost hear him. A father trying to stay calm for his son's sake. But the pages changed. The handwriting began to falter. By the fourth entry, a single line stood out, etched deep into the page. "We are not alone." Garrett described seeing a figure at the edge of the canyon. At first, he thought it was a hiker, but it didn't move like one. He just stands there, watching. When I call out, he doesn't answer. Bryson doesn't see him, but I do. As the days went on, the writing grew frantic. July 19th. He followed us. I hear him at night. Rocks shifting, breathing. Bryson sleeps through it. I don't. July 20th. We're running out of food. I found tracks, barefoot. Too big for a child. He's hurting us. Every path I take, it leads back here. One line was underlined 3 times. He doesn't want us to leave. The notebook's tone shifted into raw heartbreak. July 21st. Bryson asked me if we'll make it home. I told him yes. I don't know if I believe it. He's getting weaker. I carry him sometimes. July 22nd. We found water. He smiled for the first time in days. I told him his mom will hug him soon. I lied. God forgive me. Morales had to set the notebook down for a moment. Even hardened investigators in the room fell silent. This wasn't evidence anymore. This was a father's grief carved into paper. The last page was barely legible, the ink blurred and shaky. He's closer now. He leaves things, pieces of our gear. Our trail is gone. There's nowhere left to run. If someone finds this, know this wasn't an accident. He wanted us here. He wanted us to see him. Tell Olivia, I never stopped fighting. The page ended with a single fingerprint in dried blood. When Morales handed it to her, Olivia clutched it like it was Garrett himself. She read every word, every line. When she reached the last page, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. Her voice cracked. He tried. He tried for both of them. Tears slipped down her face, but there was something else in her eyes now. Relief. Not peace, but the closest thing to it. Her husband hadn't abandoned them. He'd fought until the very end. While forensics confirmed the notebook's authenticity, the Watcher, now in custody, sat in a concrete cell, silent, until one night, Morales stood outside the interrogation room when he finally spoke. He almost made it out. Morales froze. The Watcher smiled, cold, thin, inhuman. But I don't let them leave. He leaned forward, his voice like gravel. This is my canyon. The truth was finally clear. The Kinsleys hadn't simply vanished. They had been hunted. And as Olivia closed Garrett's notebook for the last time, one final question lingered. How many others had met the same fate in that canyon? Because in the Watcher's cell, he kept whispering the same phrase over and over. They're still out there. Detective Elena Morales stood in the observation room, arms folded, watching the Watcher through the two-way glass. He sat shackled, barefoot, his hollow eyes staring at nothing. He hadn't spoken since his arrest, except for one phrase he repeated in a rasping whisper. They're still out there. The words crawled under Morales' skin. Who? She asked him through the intercom. Slowly, he turned his head and smiled. In the hidden chamber of the hollow, forensics teams were still cataloging evidence. The crude ledger carved into stone was the centerpiece. Over 150 marks, etched in rows. Some grouped together, some standing alone. Each one represented something. Victims, years, a ritual only the Watcher understood. And among the newer marks, near the bottom, Morales spotted two names scratched deep. T. Kinsley. B. Kinsley. But there were others carved long before the Kinsleys vanished. Names that matched old missing persons reports. People no one had ever found. Until now, the canyon became a crime scene like no other. Cadaver dogs and forensic archaeologists scoured every inch of the rugged terrain. Within days, they found them. Fragments of bone, rusted tools, torn scraps of fabric faded almost to nothing. Some remains were so old they would take months to identify. But the message was undeniable. The Kinsleys weren't the first. They were just the latest. In a hidden compartment of the cavern, forensics uncovered another disturbing item. A leather-bound journal, brittle with age. Inside were rough sketches, crude drawings of the canyon, strange symbols, and unsettling stick-figure scenes, hunters and prey. One page was different. It depicted two figures, one tall, one small. A man and a boy. Above them, scrawled in jagged letters, "Mine." Morales closed the book and exhaled slowly. This wasn't survival. This was ownership. When Morales brought the findings to Olivia, she braced herself. "How many?" Olivia asked quietly. Morales hesitated. "We don't know yet." Olivia stared at the canyon map pinned to the wall. Her voice was calm, but it trembled at the edges. "Then every single one of them deserves their name back." The FBI joined the investigation, digging into decades of unsolved disappearances around Lake Tahoe and the Sierra Nevada backcountry. The list was staggering. Hikers, hunters, bikers, campers who vanished without a trace. Most had been dismissed as accidents. But now, every single one was under review, and all of them led back to the hollow. One evening, Morales sat across from the Watcher in the interrogation room. He hadn't moved for hours. Then, without warning, he leaned forward and rasped, "You won't find them all." "Why?" Morales asked. His cracked lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because the canyon takes what it wants." With ground-penetrating radar and drones, investigators uncovered more hidden crevices, small caves buried beneath tons of rock. Inside one of them, they found a chilling sight: multiple makeshift sleeping mats, remnants of old fires, and in the corner, arranged carefully on a flat stone, a row of teeth. Morales turned away, her stomach lurching. This was no longer just a case. It was a graveyard. The excavation crews had been at it for days, digging through layers of collapsed rock in one of the canyon's deepest sectors, an area known among the team as the Pit. At first, it was just another search zone. But then, the scanner readings changed. Beneath the rubble, ground-penetrating radar revealed a hollow space. A chamber. Morales stood over the screen, her heart hammering. "Open it," she said. Dust choked the air as the team worked, pickaxes and drills breaking through ancient rock until a narrow passage emerged. Ethan Rowe, the tracker, was the first to lower himself in, his flashlight cutting through the black. The air was stale, dead. And then, as the beam swept across the stone walls, something came into view that froze him mid-step. Markings, dozens of them, symbols carved deep into the rock, circles, lines, and jagged shapes. But these weren't the Watcher's crude scratches. They were older, much older. When Morales entered, the beam of her flashlight caught something on the floor. Bones. Not one, not a handful, hundreds, human and animal, mixed together in an incomprehensible sprawl. Some were bleached with age, others still stained dark with remnants of time. And in the center of it all was a raised stone platform. On it, a single object, a rusted metal lantern, its glass cracked, but still upright, like it had been placed there deliberately. Morales's voice was barely a whisper. "What is this place?" Forensics teams descended on the chamber, documenting every inch. Experts suggested the site was far older than the Watcher himself, possibly used by generations of squatters or survivalists. But Ethan shook his head. "No," he said, his voice hard. "This wasn't shelter. This was ritual." He pointed to the symbols etched into the walls. "They aren't random. He didn't make this. He found it." Back at the sheriff's office, Morales confronted the Watcher. She laid out photos of the chamber in front of him. He stared at them in silence. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost reverent. "He showed me." Morales's chest tightened. "Who?" The Watcher tilted his head, his lips curling into that unsettling smile. "The canyon." In a niche within the chamber, they discovered another wall of carvings. Unlike the previous marks, these weren't names. They were dates, dozens of them, some going back over 50 years. And beside each date, a single vertical line. Morales realized with horror what she was looking at. "Documented kills," she whispered. This didn't start with him. When Olivia saw the chamber, she stood at the entrance, unable to speak. The walls, the bones, the sheer weight of it. It was like stepping into the mouth of something that should not exist. She whispered one thing, her voice trembling. "Garrett brought us here for a reason. Even in death. He wanted this found." Morales placed a hand on her shoulder. "And now it's over." But Olivia shook her head. "No, this canyon, it's not done." Deep in a recess of the chamber, forensics uncovered one last object. A small, rusted tin box sealed shut. Inside, a set of old photographs, black and white, depicting unknown men standing at the edge of the canyon. Handwritten notes, faded almost beyond recognition. And a single map. The map marked the hollow, but it also marked 2 more locations. 2 more chambers. Detective Elena Morales stared at the brittle map under the evidence room's sterile light. 2 new marks. 2 more locations. Not far from the hollow, miles of rugged, trackless wilderness. Each site represented only by a crude X scratched onto paper that looked decades old. "This isn't over," Morales said quietly. Ethan Rowe nodded. "If this map's legit, we've only uncovered one piece of it." The first location lay 20 miles southeast of the hollow, deep in a labyrinth of canyons so isolated it didn't appear on standard hiking maps. It took the team 2 days to reach it, fighting through jagged rock and desert heat. At first, it seemed like nothing. A barren ravine with nothing but sun-bleached stone. Then Ethan found it. A narrow crack in the cliffside, hidden behind a fallen slab of rock. They squeezed through, and there it was, another chamber. This one was smaller but eerier. The walls were covered in the same symbols they'd seen in the hollow: circles, vertical lines, and crude shapes scratched deep into stone. But this chamber held no bones, no remains, just dozens of items: old canteens, torn clothing, rusted lanterns, a child's shoe impossibly out of place. And in the center, a single stone altar, stained dark with something that testing would later confirm was blood. Morales stared at it for a long time. "Not the Watcher," Ethan said. Morales nodded. "No." This was here before him. The second location was worse. It lay beyond the ridge, in a section of wilderness almost impossible to reach without climbing gear. The entrance was marked with a crude circle carved into the rock, larger than any they'd seen before. When they descended inside, they found a cavern bigger than both previous chambers combined. And on the floor, bones, dozens, some recent, some so old they crumbled at the touch. Ethan whispered, "God help us," and on the far wall, scrawled in faded charcoal, "He waits." When Morales showed the photos to the Watcher, something changed. For the first time, he laughed. A hoarse, broken sound. "You found them," he rasped. "Who built them?" Morales demanded. The Watcher's pale eyes gleamed. "The canyon was here before me, before all of us. I just listened." When Olivia saw the images, she gripped Garrett's notebook tightly in her hands. "I knew it," she whispered. "This wasn't just him. It's bigger. It's always been bigger." She turned to Morales. "End it. Burn it all if you have to. Don't let it take anyone else." The sheriff's office, FBI, and state authorities ordered the chambers sealed. Explosives would collapse the entrances. Forensics would collect what they could, but after that, no one would ever set foot in those caves again. And yet, Ethan stared at the canyon map one last time. "This won't stop it," he said. Morales glanced at him. "What do you mean?" He pointed to the map's faded edges. "This was just what we found. But what if there are more?" The Watcher was shackled, waiting for transport to a maximum security facility. Morales stood at the edge of the interrogation room. She hadn't planned to speak to him again. But then he smiled. That hollow, lifeless smile. "You didn't dig deep enough," he rasped. Morales leaned in. "What do you mean?" His pale eyes glittered. "The hollow isn't the beginning. It's a door." After his words, Morales returned to the evidence room and stared at the map. She noticed something she'd missed before. Faint lines etched beyond the borders, almost invisible. When analysts enhanced the image, the markings revealed another location. Not a canyon, not a chamber, a shaft, buried deep beneath the hollow. The excavation team drilled through the rock where the shaft was marked. What they uncovered was an opening barely wide enough for a single person to pass through. Morales, Ethan, and a team of specialists descended with headlamps and oxygen tanks. The air was stale and heavy, the walls slick with condensation. They went down, and down, until the sound of the world above faded completely. And then they saw it. It wasn't like the others. No symbols, no bones, just darkness, and at its center a pit, deep, black, endless. Ethan tossed a flare inside. It fell for almost 10 seconds before vanishing into the abyss. The silence that followed was suffocating. Morales whispered, "What is this place?" No one answered, because there was no answer. Near the pit, etched into the wall in jagged scratches, was a final inscription. Not from the Watcher. Older. IT takes them. Beneath it, dozens of marks. Not names. Not dates. Just lines. Endless, uncountable lines. Authorities debated for hours, but Morales made the call. The shaft would be sealed permanently. Explosives were placed. The hollow, its chambers, and the black chamber would all be entombed beneath tons of rock. "This ends here," she told her team. Ethan didn't argue, but as he stared into the abyss one last time, he whispered, "Does it?" Before his transfer, Morales confronted the Watcher one final time. "We found it," she said. The pit. The watcher's smile widened. Then you heard it too. Morales felt a chill run through her. Heard what? He leaned closer, his voice barely audible. The voices in the dark. They never stop. When Morales brought Olivia the news, she gave her Garrett's notebook and the recovered evidence. Olivia held it close, tears in her eyes. My husband didn't just die, she whispered. He led you here. He made you see it. Morales nodded. And now, no one else will. At sunrise, demolition crews detonated the charges. The earth shook. Stone collapsed in on itself. The hollow was buried. The canyon swallowed its secrets one last time. And then, there was silence. Weeks later, Morales stood at the edge of the now-sealed canyon. No wind, no sound, just stillness. She turned to leave, but before she walked away, she thought she heard it. Faint, low, almost like a whisper rising from deep beneath the ground. Mine! The Kinsley case had ended, but the canyon was never truly empty. The story ends with resolution for Olivia and the capture of the Watcher, but the canyon's final secret leaves an unsettling question. Was the Watcher merely a madman, or just another victim of something much older and far darker that still lurks beneath the earth? In the end, the canyon was sealed. The Watcher was taken away, his hollow stare locked behind steel and concrete. Olivia Kinsley buried her husband and her son, not in the ground, but in the truth. And for a moment, it seemed as if the story was finally over. But some places are not meant to be closed. The hollow wasn't just a crime scene. It wasn't just the hiding place of a broken man who hunted in the dark. It was older. It was patient. And if you stand at the edge of that sealed canyon long enough, some say you can still hear it. A sound so faint, you almost believe you imagined it. A whisper that doesn't belong to the wind. Mine. Maybe the canyon is silent now. Or maybe it's just waiting. 5 years. 2 bikes. One discovery that changed everything. The canyon gave us an answer, but not all of them. If this story gripped you, there's another case waiting. A mystery even stranger and darker. Subscribe now if you're ready to step into the unknown. Thanks and God bless.